Travis Hall was the quiet type. Kendra Lane was the girl who believed she could fix him. Benjamin Kreel was the teacher who once said Travis would never amount to anything. By the time Christmas was over, two of them were dead, and the third had vanished into the swamps of Florida, leaving behind a trail of blood, a cryptic kill list, and a haunting video confession. What began as a holiday romance spiraled into one of Florida's most disturbing unsolved murder rampages, fueled by revenge, delusion, and secrets buried since high school. Brooksville, Florida, was the kind of place where people left their doors unlocked and waved to each other from porches. Nestled between quiet pine groves and fading orange groves, the town barely made the map. Life moved slow there. On Main Street, holiday decorations had been up since late November. A plastic Santa stood lopsided outside the diner, and the old gas station blinked with tangled Christmas lights. Every year the same traditions played out like clockwork: church bake sales, school plays, and a Christmas Eve parade led by the local fire truck. But in December 2022 something shifted. Beneath the cheerful glow of decorations, something dark was brewing, something no one saw coming. At the edge of town lived Travis Hall, a 32-year-old handyman who kept mostly to himself. He lived in a weathered trailer behind a rundown storage facility. Most people knew him only in passing. A guy who fixed fences, trimmed trees, and sometimes helped elderly neighbors with odd jobs. He was quiet, sometimes too quiet. People described him as strange but harmless, someone who looked like he always had something on his mind. He had no close friends, no known family in town, and no social media presence. Most saw him as a loner, the kind of man who could disappear for days and no one would notice. But Travis Hall had a past. Years ago he'd been arrested for theft and drug possession. He'd spent some time in jail, completed probation, and mostly stayed out of trouble since. Still, some folks whispered that there was something off about him. His eyes, the way he stared too long, or the way he spoke when he did speak, like every sentence had been rehearsed. He was known for talking about strange things when he did open up, about betrayal, about how the world was full of liars, about how no one ever paid for the things they did to him. People brushed it off as rambling, the sort of thing that came from too many years alone. Unbeknownst to most, Travis had recently started dating Kendra Lane, a 28-year-old woman he'd gone to high school with. They had reconnected online during the pandemic and soon began seeing each other in secret. Kendra lived in a rented duplex across town and worked at a local veterinary clinic. She was friendly, outgoing, and loved animals. People who knew her couldn't understand what she saw in Travis. Some suspected he was controlling her, others thought she was just trying to. Christmas Eve in Brooksville passed with its usual charm. Children rode bikes along sidewalks, wrapped in lights. Families gathered around fire pits, and the sound of laughter drifted through the cool winter air. But one home was strangely quiet. Kendra Lane's absence from her family's cabin dinner wasn't immediately alarming. Her sister assumed traffic, maybe a last-minute change of plans, or even car trouble. Kendra had always been a little unpredictable, and with her new relationship there were unspoken concerns. Still, by midnight, when her phone continued going straight to voicemail and her social media showed no activity, worry began to settle in. By morning the concern had grown into panic. Kendra's sister, Lauren, and her boyfriend made the 2-hour drive northeast to the Ocala National Forest, where the Lane family cabin sat deep in the woods. The drive was long and silent, broken only by the occasional chirp of Lauren's unanswered texts. The moment they pulled into the gravel driveway, a sense of unease fell over them. The cabin, usually glowing with holiday warmth, sat cold and lifeless. No smoke curled from the chimney, no footprints in the dirt, no signs of Christmas at all. The front door wasn't locked. Inside, the cabin was tidy, almost too tidy. Wrapped presents sat untouched underneath a small artificial tree. A single coffee cup sat on the kitchen counter. But something felt wrong. The silence was too complete. The fireplace hadn't been used, and the thermostat was set unusually low. Lauren called out for Kendra. No answer. She checked the bedroom and froze. Kendra was there, lying on the bed, her body twisted unnaturally. Her hands were clenched, eyes wide open, and her face bore the unmistakable signs of a violent death. There was bruising around her neck, and a trail of blood had soaked into the mattress. She had been dead for hours. Lauren backed away, screaming, fumbling for her phone to call 911. The police arrived just before noon, sealing off the cabin and surrounding area. The medical examiner confirmed what was already suspected. Kendra had been strangled, her neck snapped sometime during the night. There were no defensive wounds, no signs of a struggle, and no indication that anyone had broken into the cabin. Investigators found no murder weapon. Her purse and phone were missing, along with the keys to her car, but the car itself remained parked outside, undisturbed. There were only 2 sets of footprints in the dirt, one pair leading to the front door, and another leading away barefoot, heading into the woods. Travis Hall was immediately identified as a person of interest. When officers arrived at his trailer, they found the front door locked and the home empty. The interior showed no signs of forced entry or violence, but there were subtle hints of a quick departure. Drawers half open, dirty dishes in the sink, and a duffel bag missing from his closet. His phone was off, and no one had seen or heard from him since the day before Christmas Eve. Brooksville was no longer quiet. The town was now the scene of a chilling mystery, and Travis Hall had vanished. 2 days passed, with no sign of Travis Hall. His name and photo were plastered across news broadcasts and shared on social media. The state issued a BOLO, be on the lookout, warning law enforcement to consider him dangerous. Tips came flooding in, most of them dead ends. One caller claimed to see him at a rest stop outside Gainesville. Another swore he'd been spotted walking along a highway with a duffel bag. But by the time officers arrived, there was nothing. No witnesses. No tracks. It was as if he'd disappeared into the wilderness. But Travis hadn't gone off-grid entirely. On December 26, a manila envelope arrived at the Tampa Bay Observer, a small local newspaper. It was postmarked in Naples, nearly 200 miles south of Brooksville. The envelope contained a single handwritten letter, signed by someone who called himself the student. The letter was filled with strange language, phrases like unfinished business, the reckoning, and my final lesson. At first, editors dismissed it as a prank or the work of a delusional conspiracy theorist. But one detail made them pause. The letter mentioned Kendra Lane by name and referred to her death as the first correction. The newspaper immediately contacted law enforcement. Handwriting analysts and forensics teams were brought in, and detectives quickly confirmed the handwriting matched notes previously found in Travis Hall's trailer. The letter described a list, a plan for making peace with the past. It claimed that certain people had caused irreversible harm and would be held accountable for the lives they ruined. Though the names weren't included in the letter, it hinted that more deaths were coming. Police traced the postmark to a small self-service postal kiosk in Naples, located inside a grocery store. Surveillance footage was grainy, but it showed a man wearing a dark hoodie and sunglasses dropping the envelope into the mail slot just before midnight on Christmas Day. His face wasn't clearly visible, but investigators were confident it was Travis. They had no idea what he was doing in Naples, but that answer came just a few hours later. That same day, Fort Myers police were called to a quiet residential street after neighbors reported a terrible smell coming from a duplex. It was a retirement neighborhood, mostly elderly couples and widows. Inside the modest home, they discovered the body of 68-year-old Benjamin Kreel, a retired high school English teacher. He had been bludgeoned to death in his study. Blood was splattered across the desk and walls, and a heavy brass lamp believed to be the murder weapon lay shattered nearby. Nothing had been stolen. No signs of forced entry. Just a brutal personal killing. Detectives began combing through Kreel's background and quickly found a connection. Nearly 15 years earlier, he had taught English at Brooksville High School, Travis Hall's old school. When police checked school records, they confirmed it. Kreel had failed Travis during his senior year. According to former staff members, the student-teacher relationship had been tense, and now, Kreel was dead. The list, it seemed, was real, and Travis was far from finished. Detectives stood in the blood-soaked study of Benjamin Kreel's Fort Myers home, trying to make sense of the scene. The retired teacher's body was slumped beside his desk, face down, surrounded by shattered glass and open books. The room looked like it had been ransacked, but it was a controlled mess. Only specific items had been disturbed. The television and electronics remained untouched, and there was no sign of valuables being stolen. What caught their attention was a manila envelope placed neatly on the desk. On it, in shaky block letters, were the words, "To the state of Florida." Inside the envelope was a black and white photo, slightly yellowed with age. It showed a teenage Travis Hall sitting in a high school classroom, arms crossed, staring at the camera with a blank expression. Behind him stood a younger Benjamin Kreel, hand resting on the back of Travis's chair. On the reverse side, someone had written, 208, room 1112, the beginning. Alongside the photo was a folded sheet of lined notebook paper containing a list of names. Most had been crossed out with thick red ink. Only 2 names remained uncrossed at the bottom: Kendra Lane and Benjamin Kreel. The discovery electrified the investigation. The letter mailed to the newspaper, the murder of Kendra, and now this crime scene, all pointed to one thing: premeditation. Travis wasn't acting on impulse. He was executing a plan. Investigators now had proof that Kendra and Benjamin weren't random victims. They were targets on a personal kill list, and the rest of the names, though crossed out, demanded attention. Detectives began tracking down the other individuals listed. 3 had already died under unusual circumstances in the last 2 years. One, a former classmate of Travis, died in a hunting accident after his gun misfired in the Everglades. Another, a former high school coach, had overdosed in his apartment just months earlier. The third, a woman who once taught at Brooksville High, had taken her own life in what was thought to be a sudden mental health crisis. At the time, no one had linked any of the deaths, but now, with Travis's list in hand, every incident was being re-examined. Back in Fort Myers, forensic teams combed Kreel's home for evidence. Fingerprints on the brass lamp matched Travis Hall. DNA under Kreel's fingernails confirmed a struggle, and surveillance footage from a nearby gas station captured Travis's truck driving into the neighborhood the night before the murder. He had parked several blocks away and walked in. It was clear he had planned the attack carefully. The list was a map of vengeance, and it suggested something deeper than rage. Travis had held on to grudges for more than a decade. He hadn't just blamed these people. He believed they had ruined his life. Every death, every step, had been methodical. He had waited, watched, and struck when no one expected it. Authorities realized this was no longer a search for a fugitive. It was a race to understand a disturbed mind, before more names, even crossed-out ones, turned into bodies. The list found in Benjamin Kreel's study was more than a clue, it was a blueprint. Investigators took it apart, name by name, building timelines, cross-referencing dates, and reaching out to anyone who had ever crossed paths with Travis Hall during his school years. What they uncovered painted a disturbing picture. A young man who believed his life had been deliberately destroyed by a handful of people he once trusted. Each name represented a person he believed had humiliated him, rejected him, or stood in the way of what he thought he deserved. The top of the list began with the name of Travis's father, who had died of liver failure in 2019. His name had a jagged red line through it, and the words "handled" scrawled beside it. The next 2 were his former football coach and a high school science teacher. Both had died in the last 3 years, under what had previously been classified as accidental or natural causes. Now investigators began looking at them with new eyes. The hunting accident that killed Coach Allen was suddenly suspicious, especially when ballistics revealed the gun had been tampered with. Toxicology from the science teacher's overdose was reanalyzed, and though it initially pointed to a suicide, investigators found evidence the dosage had been switched in her medication just weeks before her death. It was becoming clear that Travis had been killing long before Christmas. Kendra Lane and Benjamin Kreel were not the beginning of his spree, they were the end. The final, most personal pieces of a long-running plan that had started quietly and escalated with precision. The other crossed-out names on the list included a guidance counselor, a former best friend, and a local police officer who had arrested Travis in 2012. Some were alive, some were dead, and some were missing entirely, their whereabouts unknown. Investigators also found that Kendra's name had only recently been added to the list. She wasn't part of the original group. This suggested something else: betrayal. They searched her devices, reviewed messages, and interviewed her coworkers. What they discovered added a layer of complexity. Kendra had been growing distant from Travis in the weeks before her death. She had confided in a colleague that she was afraid of him and planned to break things off after Christmas. She also revealed she had found a notebook in his truck, filled with disturbing thoughts and sketches of people hanging or being buried alive. She hadn't gone to police. She thought he just needed help. But Travis saw her decision as something far worse. To him, it was another abandonment, another person turning their back. Her name on the list was his way of finalizing a story he had been writing in his head for years, a story of revenge, betrayal, and punishment. The list wasn't just a plan, it was a reflection of his twisted worldview. And while 2 names remained uncrossed when it was found, detectives feared that more names had been added since. Names that no one had seen. Names that law enforcement had no way of protecting. The manhunt shifted into high gear after the murder of Benjamin Kreel. Forensic teams were working around the clock, but Travis Hall continued to slip through every net law enforcement cast. He was always one step ahead, with a history of living off-grid and knowledge of Florida's wilderness. Officials feared he had disappeared into one of the many sprawling forests or swamps that covered the state. Their fears were confirmed days later, when a wildlife ranger discovered a muddy, abandoned pickup truck deep inside Big Cypress National Preserve. The vehicle was confirmed to be Travis's. It had been driven miles off the main road, along narrow dirt rails used mostly by hunters and off-roaders. The truck was partially submerged in a shallow pool of murky water, its tires flat, the doors unlocked. Inside, investigators found what looked like the remnants of someone who had been camping out for days: crumpled wrappers, half-empty bottles of water, and 2 cans of beans were scattered on the passenger seat. The glove compartment had been emptied, and maps of Florida's forest systems were stuffed under the driver's seat. But what unsettled investigators most was the notebook found on the dashboard. It was soaked from the humidity and smudged with mud, but some pages were still legible. The writings were disturbing, rambling thoughts about justice, childhood trauma, and punishments for the chosen. Several pages were filled with drawings, skulls, trees with nooses hanging from their branches, and human figures lying face down in the dirt. One page simply read, "I walk where they won't, I live where they can't." Nearby, they found remnants of a fire pit, charred wood, and melted plastic. In the ashes, they recovered fragments of a burned photograph. Forensic analysts later confirmed it was a class photo from Brooksville High School, with several faces scratched out in black ink. The symbolism was chilling. Travis wasn't just hiding, he was purging the past. Authorities began a full-scale manhunt across Big Cypress. Helicopters scanned the swampland using infrared, and K-9 units tracked scent trails that eventually disappeared near an alligator-filled marsh. Drones buzzed above the canopy, and airboats were deployed into deeper waters. The terrain was brutal, humid, dense, and crawling with venomous snakes and predators. It was a perfect place for someone who didn't want to be found. Search teams discovered another makeshift camp a few miles from the truck. There they found a single boot, a torn jacket, and a waterlogged disposable camera. When developed, the images showed dark, grainy photos of trees, animal carcasses, and what appeared to be a dugout pit. One final image was of Travis himself, reflected in the cracked mirror of his truck, staring straight into the lens. Despite the intensity of the search, Travis remained a ghost. He left no digital trail, no phone activity, no credit card use. He'd vanished into the wilderness, leaving behind symbols, clues, and fear. Law enforcement realized that he was no longer trying to escape. He was making a statement. He wanted the world to see what he had done, and then disappear into the swamps, taking his final truths with him. On New Year's Day, just as the media attention surrounding the murders began to slow, a small local news station in Sarasota received an unmarked package. Inside was a USB drive and a single printed page. The page had only 4 words written in thick black marker: "This is my truth." Thinking it was a prank, the station's producer loaded the contents onto a secure computer. What they found left the entire newsroom in silence. A haunting video file simply titled "Final Broadcast." The footage began with the crackle of static, then shifted to a shaky view of a wooded area at night. The image wobbled as if the camera had been propped up on a tree stump or rock. A flashlight beam flickered, catching tree trunks and mist. After a few seconds, a figure stepped into frame. It was Travis Hall, thin, pale, wearing a camouflage jacket, his face partially shadowed by a hood. His eyes were hollow, but locked onto the lens with unsettling clarity. He didn't scream, cry, or pace. He stood still, silent for a long time before opening a worn notebook. In a slow, calm voice, he began reading. The words were chilling. He spoke about a life filled with betrayal, of being dismissed, humiliated, and punished by those who claimed to be helping him. He described himself not as a monster, but as a corrective force. He said he had been reborn in silence, and that every death was a lesson. "I was made by your systems," he said, "and now I return as your consequence." He named no one directly, but referenced the teacher who called me a waste of time, the girl who looked at me with pity, and the friends who laughed behind my back. Every grievance was recited like scripture. Near the end of the recording, his voice became softer. He admitted he knew he wouldn't survive, that he didn't plan to be caught, and that he would vanish into the roots of the earth. Then he looked directly into the camera and said the final line, "Some ghosts never rest. Some don't want to." The screen faded to black. The entire video lasted less than 6 minutes. The news station contacted the authorities immediately. Experts confirmed the voice and facial features matched Travis Hall. The location in the video appeared consistent with parts of Big Cypress Preserve, but identifying the exact spot proved impossible. The background was too dark, and the flashlight beam moved too unpredictably to provide usable clues. The ground was littered with leaves and moss, offering no landmarks or trail markers. The FBI, now officially involved in the case, declared the video both a confession and a threat. Though Travis never indicated he planned to continue killing, his words suggested that his mission, in his mind, was complete. Still, officials couldn't be certain. He had already proven capable of hiding in plain sight for days, manipulating the terrain, and leaving behind just enough to confuse those following him. The video was a final message, not only to law enforcement, but to the world watching. Travis Hall had turned his pain into purpose, and in doing so had become a phantom of his own making. Weeks turned into months, and despite the exhaustive search efforts, no trace of Travis Hall was ever found. His disappearance remained one of the most perplexing elements of the entire case. Drones, canine units, divers, and even cadaver dogs combed through the murky swamps of Big Cypress National Preserve, but nothing conclusive ever surfaced. No body, no belongings, no signs of life or death. Some investigators believed he had taken his own life deep in the swamp, his body consumed by the unforgiving elements. Others were convinced he had managed to escape, possibly disguised, possibly aided by someone, vanishing into the folds of backcountry roads and forgotten towns. What remained, however, was the haunting legacy he left behind. In Brooksville, the townspeople tried to return to normal, but the scars were permanent. The Lane family never moved back into the cabin where Kendra was killed. It sat locked, collecting dust and silence, a sad monument to a life interrupted. A small cross stood outside the front porch, left by her sister, replaced each year with a new bouquet of flowers on Christmas Eve. The cabin became a place people avoided, a landmark of fear whispered about but rarely mentioned aloud. At Brooksville High School, where it had all seemingly begun, the atmosphere changed. Teachers walked the halls with a newfound caution. The old yearbooks were pulled from the library shelves, and in staff meetings, the name Travis Hall was never spoken. Still, each year on December 25th, a single red rose would appear mysteriously on the steps of the school's main entrance. No note, no signature, just the flower. No one ever saw who placed it. Cameras installed after the first appearance never captured a thing. It became part of the school's folklore, a ghostly tribute that stirred more discomfort than peace. Online, true crime communities dissected the case endlessly. Message boards flooded with theories. Some believed Travis had been swept away by the swamp, his body never recovered. Others claimed sightings in Georgia, Alabama, even as far as Texas. Truck stops, hiking trails, small-town motels, each one turned out to be a dead end. Some amateur sleuths suggested he had been planning his escape for years, that the murders were only the final act of a larger exit strategy. The video he recorded was rewatched, analyzed frame by frame, with theories spun from every blink and shadow, but the truth remained elusive. The case was officially labeled inactive, but never closed. Cold case units continued to monitor tips, but nothing new ever materialized. The file sat in a thick binder, marked with a red tab and the words "Christmas Rampage, Travis Hall" printed across the front. For those who had known him or crossed paths with him in school, he became a ghost they couldn't forget. A reminder that sometimes evil grows slowly, unnoticed, until it explodes. In the end, Travis Hall became more than a fugitive. He became a legend, a specter of unresolved pain and quiet rage, swallowed by the swamp or hidden in plain sight. Either way, his story was a chilling testament to how darkness, once buried, can rise again and vanish without a trace.